Welcome to this special Veterans Day edition of In Focus. I'm Cheryl Wills. Today's program is personal. Over the years, it's been a privilege to share the story of my great-great-great-grandfather, Sandy Wills. Born enslaved in Tennessee, he emancipated himself during the Civil War and enlisted in the United States Colored Troops and was honorably discharged in 1866. His military legacy completely lost to my family for generations until I uncovered his heroic service 15 years ago. And when I realized Sandy Wills was buried in an unmarked grave, I was shattered, heartbroken, but also determined to do something about it should the opportunity ever present itself. Well, that opportunity came this summer. These are my family members carrying the remains of our patriarch of freedom away from a former slave plantation in Tennessee for the last time. 135 years after Sandy's death, he was reburied, this time with full military honors. He's now at eternal rest with his comrades. And as we celebrate the nation's veterans this weekend, it's my honor to share this story with you. When I initially logged onto a genealogy website 15 years ago, my goal was to learn more about my father's past. Clarence Wills's short life was a mystery to me and my siblings. We hardly knew the brave firefighter killed when he lost control of his motorcycle during a collision on the Williamsburg Bridge in 1980. He was 38 years old. I was 13, the oldest of 5 children. I also didn't know much about my father's military background, but during his funeral, I realized he was a proud paratrooper, and during the long ride from our neighborhood in Rockaway Beach, Queens, to Calverton National Cemetery in Long Island, military officers and veterans saluted my father's flag-draped casket during a solemn ceremony. Dad loved being a firefighter in Midtown Manhattan and knew the city inside out, but he was not a native New Yorker. Born in Brownsville, Tennessee, he grew up in a segregated rural town where cotton was king. Our ancestors were enslaved, but their names and stories had completely disappeared, as if they had never existed. The digital upload of the U.S. Census brought our long-lost ancestors back to life. The 1870 census in particular is a goldmine for African Americans. It's the first census where Black people are documented by name, age, location, occupation, and marital status. And in the military archive, I stumbled upon a half-dozen Wills men, all from Haywood County, who enlisted in the Civil War shortly after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. James Wills, Andy Wills, Mac Wills, Sandy Wills, Richard Wills, and Dick Parker. These enslaved men escaped from Edmund Wills's plantation and joined the United States Colored Troops during the height of this bloody war that tore America apart. But I was desperate to know who, if any of these men, were blood relation. I hired a professional genealogist, and he was able to determine that only one, Sandy Wills, was indeed my great-great-great-grandfather, honorably discharged in 1866. He returned to Haywood County and married Emma Moore West in 1869. Together, they had 9 children. His second son, Alex, born in 1871, my great-great-grandfather. Alex's oldest son, Alan, born in 1898, that's my great-grandfather. Alan's middle son, that's my grandpa, Fred Wills. and he took a leap of faith and left the cotton fields for a city of steel.
After the southern migrants...
I interviewed my grandpa for a Black History Month segment about the Black migration shortly before he died.
I had some people left south, my uncle. They left south and went north, and they went to Chicago. And they would visit south and tell people how much money they were making up there. And we said, we couldn't see how a person could make that much money in a week.
Sadly, Grandpa died before I could tell him about Sandy Wills, the brave 23-year-old who rounded up his friends to fight for freedom and won. Lucky for me, Sandy and his wife left behind plenty of documents that paint a vivid picture of their lives as sharecroppers. Like this 1874 deposition where he says, "I am 33 years of age. I am a farmer. I live on Widow Moore's farm." The Widow Moore is Judith Moore, wife of businessman and enslaver John Bertie Moore. He owned dozens of slaves, including Sandy's wife, Emma. After the war, Sandy and most of his comrades relocated to this sprawling farm and built new lives as free men. Sandy died when he was about 50, but there was no documentation about where he was buried. I searched all of the national and local cemeteries, and he was nowhere to be found. His widow, Emma, filed depositions of her own in her appeal to get a widow's pension from the military. She explains how Sandy was tallish and his skin was almost black. She even describes their wedding in 1869 and explained how she kept her family records in her Bible. A Bible she could not read because enslaved people in that town were not allowed to be educated. She signed every legal document with an X. Between military records and sworn depositions, I resuscitated family members who lived in the very same town where my father was born. I had come full circle and used their lives as a powerful teaching tool about slavery, the Civil War, and the Black migration. I wrote children's books and visited schools proudly representing a Civil War veteran, lost and now found. At the time, I thought that was the extent of it. Little did I know, I would soon visit the former plantation in West Tennessee, eerily frozen in time. When this special edition of In Focus continues, unearthing the secrets of this 200-year-old former slave plantation during my relentless search for Civil War veteran Sandy Wills. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this special Veterans Day edition of In Focus. You know, for years, I wrongly assumed that the former slave plantation where my family once lived was long gone after nearly 2 centuries. Well, little did I know it was frozen in time, and the same family still owned it.
My grandfather, George West, was born in Haywood County, but we don't know if right here, because I know.
When you start digging into your ancestors' past, you're bound to discover living relatives too. This is Ethan West, my newly discovered 4th cousin once removed. He tracked me down after reading my book, Die Free. Here's how we're related. My great-great-great-grandmother, Emma, and Henry were siblings. Ethan is Henry's great-great-grandson. Ethan is obsessed with our family legacy in West Tennessee. He keeps every family record dating back to slavery in this growing binder. When I expressed how heartbroken I was that Sandy's grave was nowhere to be found, it was Ethan who left his home in Cleveland and traveled the back roads in Brownsville in Haywood County, hoping to learn more about our past. We had no expectations. Turns out, Ethan stumbled upon the farm on day 1. This sign, Moreland, easily tipped him off. A safe bet that the land here was connected to its original owner, John Bertie Moore. Over the years, we've gathered lots of research about the businessman who brought his slaves to this cotton-rich county to make his fortune. One of them, my 4 times great-grandfather, Dolphin West. That's Emma's father. After several trips to Moorland, Ethan introduced himself to the great-great-grandchildren of John Bertie Moore. While camera-shy, they were friendly and listened carefully as Ethan explained our family's legacy on their inherited property. During 2017, I finally had the chance to meet them as well. To my amazement, the Moore family preserved the last standing log cabin where I believe my family once lived. We posed in front of the crumbling fireplace, my newly found cousins and I, the heart of this humble home. I climbed into the attic and thought about the enslaved children who probably slept on these bare wooden floors. While touring the family farm, we stopped by the final resting place of John Bertie Moore perched on a hill. And then it occurred to me that the black folks who lived here are probably buried here as well. And I was right. The Moore family took us to the other hill, about 200 feet away, which they had dutifully protected for generations. I could hardly believe my eyes. No markers or monuments here, just trees, debris, and leaves piled high. If in fact my grandpa Sandy Wills was 6 feet below, I would move heaven and earth to get this Civil War veteran out. In my eyes, there's no way an American hero should be buried on private property like this. I flew back to New York City, my mind spinning like a top. Several years later, I returned to Brownsville, this time with a team from Ohio Valley Archaeology to take a closer look at this African burial ground. Dr. Jared Burks and I became fast friends.
An electromagnetic induction meter, ground penetrating radar, and a magnetometer. They look into the ground in slightly different ways.
Using ground-penetrating radar to determine the possible location of grave shafts,
This is the magnetic data.
Dr. Burks created this geophysical survey. The yellow rectangles represent possible graves.
We're about the same size. So far, we've looked at the magnetic data, and that pretty clearly, at least to me, shows a series of graves arranged in rows, maybe 6 or 7 rows. They all seem to be concentrated in one part of the woodlot that we're working in.
Dr. Burke's magnetic data also revealed the graves were oriented east to west, facing the rising sun.
It's a Christian burial practice, and I think that's because if you're the person in the grave, when you look up, you see, Jesus in the east coming up.
Facing the rising sun on this hallowed ground, now armed with concrete evidence that these graves are real, even though burial records have been lost. Now that I was becoming a regular here, I wanted to get to know this quaint southern town, population about 10,000. Brownsville is home to the West Tennessee Delta Heritage Center, home of the Tina Turner Museum. The star grew up here and attended a segregated high school, as did blues legend Sleepy John Estes. The sound of the Mississippi Delta blues still rings in the air here. My grandpa Fred, rarely seen without his guitar. His sweet tenor voice was popular in local juke joints in Brownsville during the late 1930s and early 40s. My father Clarence and his brother Van inherited the same talent. The musical history in my family stayed alive, but our family's military history dating back to the Civil War somehow disappeared. Dr. Burks warned me that the road to finding Sandy Wills was a gamble, a big gamble. The soil, he told me, was silty, meaning it's made up of sand and clay particles, not ideal for bone preservation. Despite the many obstacles and hurdles ahead, I was single-minded about finding the remains of this Civil War veteran and giving him a proper military burial. Sandy Wills' name is etched in the African American Civil War Memorial in the nation's capital. He fought for freedom for future generations.
You cannot bury the truth.
Now it was time for my generation to return the favor.
Ride on, King Jesus!
When we come back, shovels in the ground, the shocking discovery in grave number 1.
Fire! Fire!
And the U.S. military's 21-gun salute for a Civil War veteran. Thanks for staying with us. Last October, I appeared before a judge in Brownsville, Tennessee with my archaeology team to explain my intentions. Simply put, this American hero deserved better. The court agreed. And on April 29th, the excavation for Sandy Wills began. Dr. Jared Burks pinpointed 7 probable graves based on his data to excavate. This was grave number 1. As I stood watch, my heart became overwhelmed with anxiety. No one could say for certain what or who was buried 6 feet below. Sandy died on February 8, 1889, of unknown causes. Had he completely returned to the dust, or were his skeletal remains preserved? As archaeologists methodically removed soil, another group sifted through the dirt in search of any clue. The first items identified? Nails from the casket.
Square nails, nails that were probably made in the 1800s.
When they reached the bottom of the grave shaft, shock and relief. A full set of teeth, although they were not attached to the root. Bioarchaeologist Dr. Giuseppe Versoletti confirmed the condition and age of the teeth indeed matched Sandy's characteristics.
We found a poorly preserved skeleton that was represented by a few teeth and traces of long bones.
And upon further examination, he could see evidence of trauma from being enslaved.
You can find evidence of stress in teeth as transverse bands, right, lines that run across the dentition. What we have seen here, those lines are there and they're extremely pronounced. Probably more pronounced than I have seen in any other skeletons that I have studied, and I have looked at hundreds of skeletons. And I think that that really shows you the impact of being born into slavery.
Dr. Burke's photographs of Sandy's remains were haunting. There was just enough evidence to confirm his height from his enlistment record, race, and sex. 6 other graves were opened. Not a single one could have possibly matched Sandy Wills except for grave number 1.
And this is where the bone.
Dr. Jared Burks delivered a comprehensive report detailing his findings, and I shared this information with the government, requesting a full burial with honors. Officials conducted their own investigation, and in July, it was official. Sandy Wills was eligible for a military burial with honors.
Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. It was a happy day.
On August 8th, the archaeology team returned one final time to open Sandy's grave. This time, I invited family and friends from Brownsville to watch as we exhumed the remains of my great-great-great-grandfather. Locals like Carrie Parker, her great-great-grandfather and uncle, Dick Parker and James Wills, actually served with Sandy.
I thought of how they were treated, number one. No payday. Worked in the hot sun from sun up to sundown.
To actually go to the gravesite where our ancestors actually are and to exhume their remains and give them the proper respect that they deserve, that is monumental. That is it's very real. It's not philosophical anymore. It's there. You can see it, you can touch, you can feel it.
Rawls' funeral home was on standby with a brand new casket because Sandy's original casket had disintegrated except for the nails and a few slices of wood. It was fitting that Ethan, who found the farm years ago, handed me Sandy's remains. I gently placed a bag filled with Sandy's teeth, nails from the original coffin, and his decomposed remains now melted into the soil into this gloss-finished crepe interior casket. Sandy deserved the best casket that money could buy. Ethan and I proudly led the pallbearers as they carried Sandy through this old cotton field one final time. The next day, a long procession from Brownsville to Memphis for the reinterment of Sandy Wills at West Tennessee State Veterans Cemetery.
This is a historical day, so we should be here to celebrate this morning. We celebrate the honor of Private Sandy Wills.
Thank you very much, Sandy Wills, for what you did for us.
Words can't describe, but one description is he's home, he's at rest, and the spirit of Sandy Wills will always live throughout us, and the legacy will live on. Thank you all.
We honor his memory today. We pledge to continue the fight for freedom, justice, and equality for all. Thank you.
And now, our final focus. Historians believe far too many Civil War veterans are buried in unmarked graves. Sandy Wills now has a headstone, his grave's first Veterans Day. It's never too late to say thank you for your service. I'm Cheryl Wills. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more stories in your communities, click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV for the latest news and weather updates every 10 minutes and more. We'll see you then.